people, it's been a while, but welcome to The Way I See It with myself, Oguntola. As you know, I did the first series of the podcast, which looked at my book, 21, no, it was called, I've forgotten the name of the book. It was called Running Chronicles, 21 Lessons I Learned from Running to Stop You from Ever Giving Up. And it was basically lessons that I had learned from running, from the practice of running, and that I wanted to share with you, that I felt that would inspire you and encourage you in your daily walk so in life. And in series 2, I decided to change the theme of the podcast to dealing with artificial intelligence, AI. Now, the reason I decided to do that was, one, because I'm pursuing my doctorate in looking at the impact of AI on filmmaking, education, and production. And so I thought, well, I might as well talk about that as I'm studying it, you know, and I am fascinated by AI and what it does, especially within the creative space, because that's what I know. But also I wanted to do it because I realized there's not a lot of voices like mine in the AI space. I don't see a lot of Black women, African in this space. And I was thinking, well, instead of saying there's no one is here, I might as well jump into the space. I might as well be a voice in the space, so that when someone else like me is looking, they will see me, they will find me. And I felt that it's very important, and I do feel, and as you will see in my podcast, and even in the first 2 in this second series that I did a while back, you will see that I do advocate for more people of diverse heritage, especially Black people, to get involved in AI, so that, you know, our community is not left behind, as we have seen with filmmaking and TV and media ownership and so on. So in this next 3 or 4 episodes, I'm going to be looking at literature on AI and education, or AI and filmmaking, or AI and filmmaking practice, or filmmaking education. The reason I'm doing that is because I was doing a literature review as part of my doctorate, and I found a lot of writings about AI on education, AI in filmmaking, and AI in creative practice. And I just thought, and I have produced a blog, so you can get onto my website and get the full review of the papers that I looked at. But I just wanted to do a blog so that I share the information in a more accessible way, maybe for a lot of people who don't have time to sit down and take time to read, but who can just listen to it on the go. And obviously, by bringing it onto a podcast, hopefully generate more dialogue, more discussion, and reach, you know, other people who would not even look at this topic generally. So the first discussion I'm having is going to be around how governments and policymakers look at AI in education. So my specific topic for this session, or this episode, is governments and policymakers' relationship with AI in education. The papers I reviewed were written in 2022 and 2023, so quite recent. But what I have found about AI is that it's moving so fast that even papers or articles that I have read that were relevant in the early part of 2024 are no longer relevant, or even if they're relevant, they're limited in their outlook or output at the end of 2024. So really, really interesting how it's moving, how it's changing, evolving very rapidly, far more rapidly than policymakers and governments are able to manage, I think, and keep up with. So this first paper is one that was written for the House of Lords, and it was written by James Tobin. It was in response to a question by Baroness Kidron, and she wanted to look at the impact of AI on school children, social development, and their privacy, and, you know, educational outcomes. And so he wrote this paper in response to that, and he talks about his focus really is about AI as an assistant, you know, supporting teachers, supporting children, supporting admin, helping to develop learning materials, learning tools. So that was the focus of, I think, his paper, which I thought was good, but I think that the definition of AI for this paper was quite limited and not broad enough. I think it overlooked a lot more of AI's capabilities and what AI can do. and just focused on, administrative capacity, which maybe is how they're looking at AI in education, but I think that that could be broader. In any case, Tobin mentioned that AI in education in England is worth over $900 million. It is now over $1 billion, I believe. But the paper for me, the focus of the paper for me by Tobin was just how he just kept talking about the risk of AI. He talked about, the EdTech tragedy, which is the way UNESCO refers to EdTech, and I just thought that it was really negative a little bit. I think that it focused too much on risk, too much on bias, too much on the things that AI, I wouldn't say failed to do, but is not capable of fixing. And so I think that was an issue. I mean, in one part they talk about how AI firms, EdTech firms, are cannibalizing the sector, and I thought words like that, cannibalizing the sector, the EdTech tragedy, words like that, they don't create confidence in people who might want to use AI, in educators. I think they create a lot more trepidation than they should. They ended with the need for guidelines around the use of AI, which is quite right, and I'm going to talk about that in a little while when I come to the other papers. And also, when they talk about the threats of AI, I just found that some of the things they mention, about people being influenced by AI, or having their privacy infiltrated or impacted on by AI. I just thought that some of those things were things that already exist with the internet and were not caused by AI, and therefore I thought that the focus should have been more on how to guide users, how to help users, how the benefits of AI. And I'm not saying there's no need for the risks to be discussed. It is, but I just thought that there was an absence of balance. And they talk about also, how AI might exacerbate or causes inequality, and I just think that that's that doesn't make any sense, because AI didn't cause inequality. The world is unequal across the globe, within countries, within communities, within schools, within homes. There's inequality across the board. There are bigger structures, and there are structures, economic, political, social, cultural structures, that maintain these inequalities, and they are not caused by AI. AI has simply come into this space. So the way that they describe AI, that it's causing inequality, I just thought was a bit far off. And for me, when at the end of the paper, I felt that the government needs to be far more open and positive towards AI in education, and they have to recognize, of course, that the tools are here to stay, as I believe Ali Kosh said in his paper on AI and script writing or something like that. But it was Ali Kosh that said it. And they have the tools are here; they're here to stay. So the focus must be, how do we harness it for good? How do we harness the good of AI for both learners and educators and practitioners? I thought that they missed an opportunity to tell lawmakers what was good about AI, what is good about AI, and how it can be used and how it can be harnessed. And it might just be because they are not using the tools themselves. But I think that even though government does need to pay really, big, deep, important attention to risk and bias and the dangers of AI, I think that they should just as well, discuss its potential and what it can do, so that people have confidence to use it. And the full review of Tobin's paper is, of course, on my website. You can take a look at it there at nanaooguntola.me. So the second paper I looked at was a report by the Council of Europe. It was written by Holmes and other people and others. And it was called Artificial Intelligence in Education, a Critical Review Through the Lens of Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law. And this was just done in 2022. I enjoyed this because it told me where policymakers, bureaucrats, technocrats are in terms of thinking about AI in education. And it told me that they are extremely trepidatious, not very experimental, not curious, very risk averse, very risk conscious. All right. This article, and it says it's a critical review. So I suppose that tells you that it's going to be critical of the tool. So I can kind of give it that. But what I also found here was just how much negativity there was around AI. And the other thing that was interesting, just to go back, is the discussion they had about, human rights and children's rights and privacy and bias and things like that, in a way that you will not find in other writings, all right? Because their mandate is different from, say, the Department of Education or the House of Lords. Their mandate is much wider. It involves countries, it involves a whole continent, and it involves a lot more people. So therefore, their approach and the design and the writing is geared towards addressing or meeting the needs of, or relating to, making it relevant, and also being protective of their communities, right? Of the communities that they serve. So it was extremely critical. It talked about bias as well here. And again, I have that issue where bias isn't caused. I keep saying it. You'll see, I said it several times on social media, that bias isn't caused by AI. AI is going to exacerbate it. In fact, I was talking the other day about how now AI, ChatGPT have an offering for like $200, and they say it's for a few people, for a few, right? That gap of who can pay $200 a month is increasing, is bringing about who can afford it and who can't, basically. And of course, Sora by OpenAI. They talk about data mining, and they talk about how the fact that when young people use these tools, AI company, tech companies are immediately able to mine their data, and they call for a situation where AI companies or tech companies, when they're mining young people's data about when they're using their equipment, they should be able to pay something called data rent. And I really like that idea. But of course, these ideas that they throw out are not being enforced or not being proposed. They're not policies, so it's not going to happen. It's just an idea, right? They talk about how tech companies are just for profit companies, and they're not focused on meeting the needs of the people. And that is so true. They want tech companies to be culturally appropriate, socially appropriate, politically appropriate, not just within countries but outside countries, globally. They're saying that they shouldn't just make a one size fits all for everybody and just say everybody use it. And I understand that, but at the same time, like they said, tech companies are profit-making companies. They're profit-seeking companies. They're not out there to make sure that everybody can use their, they're not looking to be culturally or socially or politically appropriate. They're just out there to make money. So if you want them to be culturally, politically, you should make that make sense in terms of finance. And don't get me wrong as well here. I'm not saying that once tech companies see that there is a need for their tools to be more culturally appropriate, socially appropriate, politically appropriate, that they shouldn't go out and do it, that they shouldn't make an effort to meet those needs. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if you make it an economic requirement, so if you had special requirements on your tools that you use in schools or make available to schools, and you say these are the specifications that we have for all tools coming into our schools, otherwise we will not buy them, that's touching the money. The tech companies will do that, but then, so that's the disconnect. Do policymakers want to do that? Do they want to say, if you don't do this, we will not buy you? Or are they friends with them? Really, they're just criticizing them on paper. Is there a commitment to make tech companies accountable, right? Because if you require it of them that if you don't meet these requirements, we will not buy from you, they will absolutely do it. And if you don't have the rules and systems in place for these people to operate within, they're not going to operate. What are they operating within? What are they doing? Who's guiding them? Who's providing policy? Who's saying these are the structures? So these are absent, and yet the criticisms are coming. And I'm saying that I think that, yes, it's okay to put the criticism out there, but who's dealing with it? Who's dealing with it? In the Council of Europe's report, they call for edtech companies to bring about change, to be engaged with stakeholders in creating, the tools for that schools and educational establishments use. And I agree with that. I think, yeah, sure. But then, like I said, these are profit-making companies. What's the interest to them? It has to be in their pocket. I think that in terms of bringing stakeholders together, it should be the responsibility of policymakers and government. They need to take that leadership. They need to lead on that. They need to bring all the required stakeholders together, the edtech companies, AI companies, educational establishments, the teachers, the trainers, users, bring them all together, create that stakeholder partnership where policy can be developed for the sector. But you can't ask it of the edtech companies when you're not doing anything about it. That's another thing. And I thought this article as well, this report, was so critical that there's one point where they say that, you know, edtech companies are a risk because they might just go out of business. And I just thought that, you know, are they looking to just fill up a page? Any company can go out of business. The catering company can go out of business. The uniform company can go out of business. Are you going to stop working with them because of that? No, you're not. So why would you say that they're a risk to schools and educational establishments because they might go out of business? I just thought that was like going a bit too far on that one. They offer several positive uses of AI. They talk about how AI can help to identify learners at risk. They talk about how it can help, you know, developing the brain. It talks about how it gives learners agency to choose what they're doing, how they're doing it. It talks about how AI supports children with disabilities, how it can support parents and children. And so really, really good definitions or acknowledgements of the use of AI, and obviously how it would support the administration and assessments and all that around and attainment around education. They just talk about that. So like I said earlier, a lot of the article is quite critical. It refers to AI as high risk. It talks about AI and safeguarding, and these are the things that as well that set this document apart. You know, things like safeguarding, AI loyalty, AI data rent, and things like that that are not necessarily in the mainstream, but which are important to note as you learn about AI in education. But they talk about how, you know, we have to safeguard children and young people in education from things like sex trafficking, the ethics of AI, looking at how complicated this is, you know, and things like that. But for me, again, what I feel is that the problems that they mention, safeguarding and trafficking children, these are already a threat via the internet. AI didn't start them. Educational institutions, as far as I'm concerned, are highly protected spaces. Yes, things can go wrong, and you know, things can slip through the net because we are dealing with human beings, but they are generally very protected spaces. They have all kinds of policies in place. They have password protected equipment where young people cannot get on the internet without permission. They decide on the tools that young people can go on. So there's all kind, there's, you know, there's DBS, there's all kinds of protections in place. So when you're talking about AI as a risk to safeguarding, I think that it's almost, I find it difficult to understand how people will get past the protections against, say for example, sexual exploitation or, you know, recruiting for terrorism or whatever. How people would get past those protections at school. If you can't get past those, I don't think you can get past using AI tools that will hurt you. I think that educational institutions need to look at, obviously, the tools, and just like they do with the internet, these are the tools that are available on our equipment within our space, within our wall. We'll limit young people to these equipment, to these tools, to these AI tools. Put those boundaries in place, and I think you solve the safeguarding problem. I don't know, but you tell me what you think. But I think that a lot of the hoo-ha about safeguarding and children at risk from AI in school fail to take cognizance of the fact that educational institutions are quite protected, and the young people are quite protected whilst within those walls. Outside those walls, well, you know, that's another issue. But within educational institutions, I think they are generally quite safe. They talk about AI in education colonialism. So they're saying that edtech companies are simply producing and colonizing, developing worlds with their tech by just giving them their tech as they've produced it without consideration of the countries or the political landscape or cultural landscape of these countries. But hey, that's so strange. That is something that Europe's been doing for years. That's not new. Like our entire educational curriculum, mandate or program is based on the one that the West set, right? I went to school in the Gambia and in Ghana, and my curriculum, everything I learned was based on something the West said. So I learned about everything everything that was Western, right? That wasn't necessarily relevant to my own cultural, social, political landscape. So what is AI doing that's new? Nothing. So what is it that has to change? Well, yes, the tools need to change, because now the developers know that this is not right. But is it profitable to change, for them to change? That's what you got to look at. But if it's not profitable for them to change, then the people on that side, the receiving side, the developing countries, need to create tools that are cognizant of their political, cultural, and social context. They in fact need to change their entire curriculum, because AI hasn't been the one that's bringing something, that hasn't been there already. So they need to change their curriculum to suit their cultural, political context, and then the tools that are produced will be produced to suit them. And if they change their educational curriculum and the people making AI in the West haven't changed, then they should produce according to their social, cultural curriculum. The fact that we're coming back now after we continue to talk about colonialism, and now AI is part of this world system of colonialism, is just insane. And the only people that can change it are the people that are colonized themselves. So this article talks about human rights, elections, democracy, the rule of law, which, to be honest, I found very interesting, because when I'm looking at AI, you're not looking that having that bird's eye view, that eagle eye view of everything that's going on, and having a bigger picture of how AI impacts the world. And so this article does that. So for me, this article was quite critical, and I do understand that it's saying it's taking a critical stance. That's the title at the top. But I just think that in terms of, even when you've been critical, that you're a little bit more less biased, maybe a little bit more balanced, right, in your review. And I thought that sometimes the criticisms were questionable, and they were not properly thought out, properly defined, properly researched. Like, they didn't really have a foundation that they could stand on. And I think that some of the language that they used was quite negative, like saying that using AI is a high risk activity, like jumping off a roof. So that's one of my main criticisms of this article. The usefulness, of course, is its discussion on human rights, the rule of law, democracy. It provides another perspective in the deployment of AIED, with the rights and needs of the learners at the fore of any decisions or considerations in all learning tools. So that was interesting for me. That was good. I liked the fact that they talked about new concepts, or concepts that I had never heard about, like data rent, AI loyalty, AI colonialism, which is not really in the mainstream, but good to know, or good to see that people are thinking in that way. And it just kind of broadens your understanding and perception of the many areas that AI influences and AI can impact. All right. So they end by saying that there is a need for research on the impact of AI on education, which is quite good, which is true. And that is something that I am doing right now. I am looking at the impact of AI on filmmaking education and filmmaking production. And hopefully I can provide some answers and discussions and theories around how the use of AI impacts learners, so that will support how AI is developed in the future for educational establishments, especially filmmaking education, and also its production. So if you want the full review, because this is a big review, then please head over to my website at nanaooguntola.me. You'll see the blog and you can read it there. So my final review, looking at AI in education from the point of view of policymakers and governments, is on a paper written by the Department of Education. This one is called Generative AI in Education, Call for Evidence, Summary of Responses. This one is interesting because it's different from the other two. It's by government, but it is based on actual research on users. They had over 500 respondents, basically 567 responses from the education, edtech, and other AI organizations, both within and outside the UK. So they asked people using AI, generative AI in education, what is it like? How does it work? What's the impact? How do and this article for me presents a clear demarcation difference, highlights the difference between technocrats, bureaucrats who simply write about AI and those who actually use it. Those who write about AI are focused on AI risk, on the dangers of AI, on bias in AI, on colonialism in AI, on etc., etc. But those who use it are able to provide a different story. They're saying, yes, this is good. Yes, we enjoy using this. Yes, this is helpful. And here, the Department of Education asked these people, and the responses came back quite positive. And it reminds me of a paper that I will review later on. Oh, my head, my brain, I think, never mind. I can't remember who wrote it. But they researched 50,000 users and 4 million pieces of content, AI generated content, and the response was positive. People who used it were, and the people who interacted with it or who consumed it, who watched the output, right? It was positive. So this paper by the Department of Education highlights to me that when the people that use it respond and the people that just talk about it respond, you have two different responses. One is very risk averse, very fearful, and one is saying, yes, this was good. And the other thing I'd like to draw attention to is that this article, the teachers are saying, let's get accreditation for the tools, the edtech tools. Let there be accreditation. Let there be something from government and policymakers that tells us these tools we are using are good for us to use. And when we have that, we are more comfortable in using them. And that is such a good thing. The Department of Europe and Tobin's paper for the House of Lords both say that there is a need for kind of like guidance and policy around AI in education tools. And that is so right. But the people that's going to require that are the policymakers, is the government. There has to be a system in place, like a system is in place for maybe for tools that go into schools. When schools use internet tools from the internet for their education, they are accredited, they are, approved, right? So there has to be like a system in place that approves these tools, these AI tools, so that teachers feel confident to use them, right? So if you're using a tool in education, in higher education, in secondary education, you have to be able to get something that says this is approved. And so that's a whole process, right? That's a whole process of money. But I think if the council, if the policymakers and governments took the lead and brought the stakeholders to the table, including and especially edtech producers, and saying, okay, these are the rules or these are the benchmark for your production, and when you do it, you get a mark that makes it safe for you for schools to use, then I think that would work, because the edtech companies don't want to not make money, right? Because if you don't have this mark, you don't make money. So that's that. And then that makes educators, policymakers, feel safe that the tools that are going into schools are quite safe, they are approved, right? But that initial lead has to come from policymakers. But of course, that's a whole amount of money again. Who are the people that would do that, and how is that going to work? But if there was a will to do it, it would be done. So I conclude by saying that this report was a good read, an excellent read from generators of AI, as it showed the difference between those who use it and those who just talk about it. It talks about the many benefits of AI and the various opportunities for growth. it dispelled. What is interesting here as well is that the report dispels the fear that teachers will become redundant. That is so important. In the report by the Council of Europe, they do not see teachers being redundant. They feel that AI cannot teach on its own, right? You can use AI in terms of long distance learning, or into places where maybe there are not enough teachers, right? Like into rural areas, there's not enough teachers you can use. That is useful. But what they're saying is the teacher itself in the classroom is not going anywhere. And there's a report by AIED and I think Wyatt, and he's talking about how in the future the teacher might become redundant. But here, and that was just research at that time, 2017. But this article here, that's just in 2023, where there is research done with actual users, is saying that they do not see the teacher being redundant. And I have read other articles. I think my brain doesn't quite work. And I have read other articles recently about AI in creative practice and AI in creative education, filmmaking education, where they're saying the teacher does not become redundant. And so here in this article, where there is research about the role of the teacher, about using AI in classrooms, they do not see the teacher being redundant. So that's really important to note. The teacher is not going anywhere. I personally don't think the teacher is going anywhere. And also the report, it calls for the Department of Education to have oversight. And that's what I've been saying. The Department of Education must have oversight. They must engage with stakeholders, and they must lead that engagement and not let the edtech companies or other interest groups lead that engagement. It must be led by a non-biased body like government, or set up by government to do that. So these 3 documents I wanted to share with you. They're all available on my blog, nanaooguntola.me, the full reviews. But basically they give you and myself an overview of the way governments and policymakers are looking at artificial intelligence in education. First of all, quite trepidatious, quite risk averse. Secondly, when people actually use it, the response is different, right? People find AI positive and helpful. Thirdly, I think that government and policymakers must take the lead in guiding the content of edtech tools in educational establishments. They must lead that process. They must be the ones talking to edtech companies, educational establishments, users, teachers. They must be the one leading that, and they must, at the end of the day, provide accreditation for tools. And even if they don't provide accreditation for tools, just the fact that they have led that process, they're in conversation, they have considered something safe to go into schools, that would make educators far more confident about using them. And finally, there has to be some training. There has to be some training for educators and teachers on how to use AI tools. It's like they've just been left, like the AI tools are here, bang, just go figure it out yourself. I think that there is a need for training for educators, for teachers, to understand AI, what it means, but also how they can use it in their learning establishment. Okay, and by the way, I do offer courses on using AI in education and in your creative practice. So if you want to buy the course, you can buy the course. It's got 6 modules, it's online, or you can book me for a 1-day workshop, and we can go through all this information, plus give you hands-on opportunities to try out your hands at these AI tools, because that knowing how to use them, I think, will dispel a lot of the fear and a lot of the misinformation and a lot of the negative language that has been out there regarding artificial intelligence. Now, I hope that this was useful to you. Like I said, more detail on the articles on my website if you want to read it in depth. But in the meantime, feel free to comment, feel free to share your thoughts, feel free to write to me, to contact me, and hopefully I'll see you next time on The Way I See It.